In the knockouts, Juventus are gonna finish with a 4-1 record because the report coming from Spain is that UEFA scrapped the second legs of the quarter in the semifinals, meaning that there would be 5 total games played for the entire competition of the UEFA Champions League. 2 in the round of 16, 1 in the quarterfinals, 1 in the semifinals, and then the Champions League final. Juventus are going to be 4 for 4 in those games against Lyon in the quarterfinals. I'm predicting Real Madrid, possibly Bayern in the semifinals, and Paris Saint-Germain in the Champions League final. The Italian word for champions, campioni, as Gematria 44. In other words, Juventus are going to finish the Champions League knockout campaign with a 4-1 record. And the interesting thing about 4-1 has to do with the last time Juventus won the Champions League in 1996. The 1996 Champions League final, recall, was the 41st edition of the Champions League. So I have to actually click on the article of the 1995-96 Champions League to show you that connection with that Champions League. Or yes, it was called the Champions League at that time, so I have to go to that article quickly. The 1995-1996 Champions League was the 41st edition of the Champions League. In a shortened Champions League, because of the coronavirus, Juventus start 0-1 after losing to Lyon. They beat Lyon. They win in the quarterfinals. They win in the semifinals, 3-1, winning 3 out of 4 games to make it to the final because it's Ronaldo that has Gematria 34. And then Juventus win 4 out of the 5 Champions League knockout games because it's Cristiano that has Gematria of 45. Juventus win 4 out of 5 games in the knockouts to win the Champions League. It would be Ronaldo's first Champions League title since Real Madrid's Champions League three-peat, which occurred against Liverpool in the 2018 final. So here, a win in the final gives Juventus a 4-1 record in the knockouts. It is the 41st edition of the UEFA Champions League. This is another clue that you know that Juventus is going to win. If it wasn't obvious that the final being held at Lisbon is probably the biggest clue out of them all. And another thing too, 1995-96 Juventus, who did they face in the Coppa Italia for that season? I have to go to 1995-96. So in the Coppa Italia that year, Juventus got knocked out by Atalanta. The interesting thing about being knocked out by Atalanta is that the prior knockout stage of Juventus in the Coppa Italia, Ronaldo's first season, 2018-2019, they ended up losing in the knockouts of Coppa Italia to Atalanta. So the connection is not going to be Juventus' last Champions League title knocked out by Atalanta. This year they get knocked out by Atalanta. They win the Champions League. The only caveat is that they win the Champions League after losing to Atalanta in the prior Coppa Italia. So I hope you understand that not all these connections are going to be blatantly obvious. It is meant to confuse you, to make it a little bit tricky, to take it from a slightly different angle. Okay, so Juventus 5-0, 5-1-0 in the Champions League group stage for this season. Juventus already lost to Olympique Lyonnais. Juventus are 5-1-1. Juventus happen to be 5 and 1 in the Champions League with the banker Mauricio Sarri, starting the Champions League against Bayer Leverkusen in the Champions League draw 24 years later, winning the first Champions League game. Their first road win in the Champions League occurred over at Russia before Leverkusen. Juventus are going to win 6, 7, 8, and 9. So Juventus are going to finish with 9 wins and 1 loss in the Champions League this year. This has to do with the fact that it's Torino that has gematria of 91. So 4 out of 5 is the main connection. 4-1 record in the knockouts this year with the shortened first and second legs is going to tie into the last Champions League title for the Bianconeri.